All right, guys, we're back. Fitness Profit Multiplier, Anthony and Jimmy. Today we have a very, very special guest. We have someone on here who normally I would be afraid to speak to, but I'm happy to have him on here. Today we're going to be talking about all legal advice for gym owners with Matthew Beckert. So Matthew Beckert owns gymlawyers.com, and I recently have worked with Matt, and I was so interested to find out about the ins and outs of law when it comes to my fitness business, right? That was the one thing. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm always kind of like, feel all of us are afraid to talk to lawyers, right? Because we know it's going to be expensive. Most of them are just not nice. But the cool thing about Matt is he actually owns a gym. So he understands the ins and outs of what we go through on so many different levels. So I'm super excited to have you on here, Matt. So Matt, welcome on.
Hey, thanks, guys. Good morning. Good morning. Happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome, man. Awesome. So, like I said, guys, Matt is a very likable guy. So it's not, you don't have to worry about Matt being like mean on this podcast and, being a typical lawyer. But so Matt, let's just get right into it. I mean, and I guess I'll give a little bit of background for myself. So I come from a big box gym. I used to work at a Gold's gym. And when I went off on my own, I took one of the contracts from behind the desk and typed it all out. And that was my first original contract. That was kind of how I started, right? And I feel like a lot of us come down that road. But years later, I have a more established business, and priorities kind of change. And you said, okay, well, I got to protect myself, so I got to make sure I'm doing the right things. So it was kind of the reason why I got in contact with you to begin with, was because I wanted to make sure I was protected. So let's kind of talk to the gym owner who's maybe just starting out or at that midway point in their business where, do I need a lawyer?
Sure. So one of the difficulties when we were looking to start gym lawyers is to try to figure out where the need actually was for gym owners, because by the time that the gym owner is being sued, God forbid, because that's what we're all afraid of is being sued, whether it's for injury or for breach of contract, or a member gets pissed off that we kept charging them for a membership month after month when they weren't coming, even though they signed the agreement that said we can take money out of their accounts automatically each month, and whether or not they come. But by that point, it's almost too late, and there's not a whole lot we as an education and consultation company can do. So in the beginning, it was really, all right, what can we do? And what it really sort of came down to is, just as I said, it's education and it's consultation and an effort to try to get you guys, and me included, but I specialize in this stuff, so I know it, but to get you guys to understand that this is out there, the laws are there, you have to follow them, and this is what you need to be looking at and talking to an attorney about. And it doesn't have to be, I'm only calling because I'm in trouble. One of the things that we try to educate gym owners on is call now with questions, because it's a lot better to talk to you now about what you need to do in preparation to avoid being sued than it is to talk to you once you're sued. So the new gym owner, the new person listening to this, the person who's been in business, we like to call them the established gym owners, the guys who have been in business for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 9 years, whatever it is. They just need to reach out to an attorney just to go through a series of questions to understand whether or not there are already legal holes that need to be filled. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that you said, the word sued, right? Like that, like you hear that and you're like, oh my God, like you hear so many horror stories. I heard a horror story once when someone skimmed their knee on like a plyo box, and then the gym like got in super crazy trouble for it. So it's things like that. You hear that word and you're like, oh no. And and again, I could even use myself as an example. It's always like, that's not really going to happen to me. I don't have to worry about that right now. I don't have to worry about that right now. But I think that's the wrong way to think about it. So, Matt talked about how initially, hopping on the phone and kind of going through like an initial questionnaire. We kind of did that, and Matt like unmasked some things in my particular situation that I had no idea, was even a thing. So that's the thing. And I think there's a lot of hidden things that us gym owners don't even think about. So Matt, what are like
Right.
those from a general standpoint? Again, I know you don't know everyone listening to this in their particular situation, but
Sure.
what are some of those hidden things that we need to look out for as gym owners that we might be doing that are not compliant?
Yeah. So we typically break this down into, a sort of like a four-step process or four different categories. And we say, look, if you've got like these four things down, then you're pretty set up. You're pretty good to go. We may have some other unique situations, but the first one is what's your corporate setup? And I think even when I started out as an attorney and when I started my gym, anytime somebody starts talking about like LLCs and fictitious names and getting bank accounts, my head started like, oh my God, it was like exploding with this complexity. And it's not that big of a deal. It's really not. And we're happy to dive in and explain all of this stuff in its detail. But, that's step number one. Do you have an LLC? Or in your case, do you have a corporation? We usually just refer to this as LLCs because those are the simplest and easiest to set up and the least complex. So, I'll just keep referring to them as LLCs throughout this, but it could be a corporation, right? There's a distinction there. So number one, do you have an LLC? And do you have a fictitious name? And so a fictitious name is what you actually operate your gym as that's different from your LLC name. So, in my case, my gym is Bionic Fitness LLC. But we don't do anything with that name. It's just the name of the LLC. We operate as Industrial Athletics. That's a fictitious name. And the step there is, does your state require you to connect those two together? Do you have to file the LLC and then file the fictitious name as part of the LLC? A lot of times we find that gym owners aren't doing it. And it's just a matter of they just don't know the process to do it, but it's usually fairly simple. And then with the LLC, are you then opening up a business bank account? Are things in the name of the LLC? Do you have all of your documents, including the name of the LLC? So that's usually like step number one is, do you have that corporate setup? What does that corporate setup look like? And let's make sure that you've got all of those documents. You have to file an annual report. We've helped a number of gyms in New York just come up to date because they aren't filing annual reports. So a lot of that information is what we start with whenever we talk to a gym owner to kind of like set the base. If you've got this, okay, let's move on to step number two.
Right. So what I guess for a gym owner starting out, what's the best, like, because that's like, I feel like one of the things that I learned pretty early on is like, do I choose an LLC? Do I do an S Corp? Do I just do it under my name? What's kind of like the best one to give you protection if somebody's listening to this who hasn't gotten down that road yet?
Yeah. So the worst thing you can do is operate by yourself. Okay. That's called, from the legal standpoint, that's a legal sole proprietorship. And that leaves you and all of your assets completely exposed. And when we say exposed, we're always talking about either you're being sued for an injury or you're being sued for a contractual violation. Well, I was hoping my dog was the one that wasn't going to bark this show.
Yeah, that was mine. We all have them, so we get it.
Somebody went off there. Anyway, hey, make sure you've got a dog bite waiver. No, I'm kidding. So you need that. You don't want to operate as a sole proprietorship because you need that protection for just your bank account, your house, your car, right? Those sorts of things. So then you can get into the nuances of, do we want an LLC or do we want a corporation? But again, I'll talk primarily about an LLC. An LLC is a limited liability company. So as it says in the name, it's limited liability. What it does is it protects you and your personal assets. A corporation is going to do the same thing. It's just that a corporation is a little bit more formal in its setup and its yearly requirements and its formality of records and everything else than an LLC. Okay. But the bottom line is you want to have that filing so that way, God forbid something happens, it all has to trickle through that company or that corporation. And for as long as you kind of file the rest of the steps that we're going to broadly talk about today, your personal assets are protected.
Got it. Yeah, and I guess that's the most important part, is making sure that you're protected on all ends, personal wise too. I mean, that's why most of the time we start companies is that we think we're going to protect it, but there's something called piercing the corporate veil, and I've heard you talk about this before. So let's kind of mention that quick, because I think a lot of people don't know about that.
Okay. So piercing the corporate veil, and great segue also into sort of step number 2. So we kind of talked about those 4 steps, and so step number 2 is making sure you have an operating agreement, or in your case, if you have a corporation, make sure you have bylaws. So piercing the corporate veil is a legal principle that allows the sliding to the side of your LLC or your corporation. All right, so let's do this with an example. You're a gym member of mine, and you come in and you trip and fall and you hurt yourself, and you now want to sue me. And you go and you hire an attorney. So a plaintiff's attorney comes and they start investigating things. And they know, because I'm a savvy businessman, that I don't leave anything more in my business than I have to leave in my business. All of those profits that you guys are helping gym owners get, $20K a month, I'm siphoning off and putting into my own personal bank accounts because I followed all the processes and procedures, and now that's technically my money. So that plaintiff's attorney is going to come in and they want to get at me personally because that's where all the money is. So there's different things that they can do in order to slide that LLC or that corporation to the side. That's called piercing the corporate veil, to get at me personally. Right? One of those things is whether or not you have an operating agreement. LLCs have operating agreements, corporations have bylaws. Same basic concept. And so this is step number 2 of what we always check with gym owners is, great, you have that LLC, great, you've got the DBA filed, great, you're up to date with all of your corporate filing and everything else, but do you have that operating agreement? And so that's a basic contractual agreement between you and your entity that says that entity is going to step in and protect you in the event of the lawsuit.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's, again, some of those things that we didn't know. So the basic things that all gym owners basically put together, right? We have a contract and a waiver. And one of the things that you explained to me initially was they have to be 2 separate documents. And again, I guess it's I don't know if it's separate for New York versus other places, but having those 2 separate things, can we explain the difference between actually what the contract has to say versus what the waiver has to say? Because again, we're all worried about being sued and being protected against being sued. So let's talk about the differences between those, why you need 2 separate ones, and what should be in each to kind of protect you. And if someone doesn't have a waiver or doesn't have a contract, that they need to start them now.
Yeah, sure. So that's one of the last things that we check with gym owners, and those the contract and the waiver, the membership contract and liability waiver, are one of 3 typically generic legal contracts that a gym owner is going to have, the third of which is a staff member agreement. But the reason that the 2 of them need to be separate is for a matter of clarity. So let's look at the liability waiver to start, because that's a little bit more nuanced than the membership contract. So the problem that attorneys and insurance companies and everybody else who is on this side of it has to deal with is the fact that states don't have specific laws regarding liability waivers. So unlike the membership contracts, where states have very specific laws about what has to be in those contracts, they don't do that with liability waivers. And so we're all left to looking at what's called case law, which is what the courts bring down. You hear about like the Supreme Court issuing an opinion. Okay, that's case law. And what we're left to is looking at that and trying to play catch up of, okay, so Anthony, you sued me and we ended up in this court case and I brought in my waiver and the court looked at the waiver and they either said, yes, the waiver protects me, or no, it does not protect me for these particular reasons. And then attorneys and insurance companies go out and they look at those reasons and they start to put together what the liability waiver needs to look like in order to actually protect the business. Now, I give all this background to say the number one thing a court looks at is whether or not the person who is signing the liability waiver actually understands what it is that they're signing. Okay, and we'll look at it and it says things like it must have clear and conspicuous language. Okay, great. That's a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. What does it mean? It means that we need to have bold language, we need to have underlined language, we need to have italicized, we need initial spots. All this stuff needs to be in a liability waiver so that it's very clear that you coming into my gym and signing it actually understands what it is that you're signing. For that reason, you can't combine it with anything else. Because if you take your membership contract and you take your liability waiver and you put them together, and then you end up in a lawsuit, you're going to pass that document up to the person who sued you. And you're going to say, well, didn't you sign a liability waiver? Here it is. And they're going to say, oh, I thought that was a membership contract. I didn't know I was waiving all of my rights to sue this company for any reason whatsoever, or vice versa. You have a membership contract issue and you go in and they sit down on the stand and you hand them the document. It's a combined document and they look at it and say, oh, I would just thought I was signing a liability waiver. I didn't know I was giving him a right to deduct $200 from my bank account every month for the next 6 months. So for that reason, we always recommend, and we always, if we're hired to produce these forms, always make them 2 separate documents. Okay. Now, before I talk about specifics in those documents, you got any? I don't want to gloss over and talk the entire time, Anthony. You got anything?
No, I actually wish I could do sound effects because I would drop like the bomb right now because that was that. I think that was like eye-opening. All right, guys. So that was part 1 of this episode, and I think that Matt is an amazing guy, and he gave a lot of information here, which is why we wanted to break this down into 2 episodes for you guys, so this way you can dissect it and analyze it a little bit more and kind of digest the information because it's a lot. That's a lot here, and there's a lot. Matt's a great guy, and he's very, very knowledgeable and passionate about it too, which I actually love that. I love when somebody's very, very passionate about something. It just comes through, and you can kind of feel the passion on them. So, yeah, we're going to put out the second part in part 2. But, Jimmy, what was kind of like your biggest takeaway with part 1?
I was taking a lot of mental notes, right? And a lot of guys, I think, have issues with what their structure is, how to structure their business to best protect themselves. And you really got to get with a lawyer, get with an accountant, and make sure that that structure protects you against possible legal ramifications from your client base, right? So I was taking a lot of mental notes, just figuring out a couple things to change. But remember, guys, check out his website. What's the website again, Anthony?
Gymlawyers.com.
Gymlawyers.com. There's plenty of stuff on there to check out. So definitely a wealth of knowledge, and you got to protect this thing because it's your baby. It's your biggest asset. And if you're a profitable gym owner and you're taking home 20 grand every month, like the gym owners that we're working with, you want to make sure you protect that. You want to make sure that you have something legal happens, they can't come after you for that money because they look at your deep pockets and they go, I want some of that. So protect yourself. Legal entities, make sure it's in the right structure so that you're protected.
All right, guys, Fitness Profit Multiplier. If you're interested in learning how to make more money, just click that link below and we'll catch you guys on the next one.